Oh, you know what? Actually, I'm not gonna render just that section. Maybe what I'll do instead is, I mean, I'm looking at this now, and I think that it's almost like everything is darker, right? Like every value, if we check it here, it's like very close to black, like, and you have almost some pure blacks in the scene. And then it kind of jumps to very, very bright colors suddenly. So I think that would be another bigger issue that I want to see resolved. So, because honestly, having trouble painting this, I would really think a better reference, even like a 3D sculpture reference, would help you out. Maybe it's just you're not looking at sufficient photography to understand how wrinkles work. Right? So let's solve the bigger problem. I'm going to try just removing the shadow and highlights and just toning down the intensity of the shadows. Also the highlights, because I think there is too much contrast at the moment. So shadow and highlight is a nice little trick to just neutralize everything. Normally, if you want to paint more realistically, try not to have too consistent contrast of light and dark everywhere. It tends to make it look a little bit more graphic. Okay, so just tone down the contrast, and this is what I mean by it. So for skin, because skin is technically translucent, it's very soft. Let's not have so much contrast on it. So we want to have it just a little bit lesser than we have now. I'm gonna use a black and white layer effect, just so that I can plan out like what kind of color value contrast do I want to have. You can see now like actually all of your values are almost the same family, right? So maybe let's try where the skin is just a little bit lighter. Or you guys want dark skin, right? I think that was the theme, right? Like the skin is dark. Which one was it?
Not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
It should be different.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Yeah. So I'm just kind of correcting it so that the overall skin tone is at a different value group than the clothing. So then at least we know like this is skin, and the other ones are the other material. So I'm keeping the shadow, everything. So the shadow color is lighter, the highlight color is also lighter overall, right? And we're gonna do the opposite for the other stuff. So let's say like all these accessories, we can have quite high contrast on them because they're like very hard and they're very opaque. I'm just gonna do this part really quickly. Then the middle tones we'll see, like do you want more? Maybe we'll just keep everything a little bit more on the darker tone. Once again, so it's easy to find the value groups. So now if I check my value groups, you kind of see like there's a hierarchy of darks, mediums, and then lights, and they all like spread out, right? compared to what we have before.
Jarold, would you recommend that sometimes we paint in black and white first?
No, I think it's a waste of time. Unless you have time.
No.
Yeah, yeah. So you can see like the current one, this is the previous version where the values groups are so consistent. Right? So going back to your question about the black and white, yeah, I don't think it's necessary because like you can check your values just like that anyway. You know, and to me it's like because back in the day we painted black and white first because we wanted to confirm our values before we added color. But in the digital painting, you could check it anytime. So I just didn't really see the need to kind of go back and forth. Unless of course like what I said, you have a lot of time. The other thing is also like most artists are very comfortable painting faster black and white. So a lot of times we submit a grayscale render because it's like just to show you the value structure and the design really quick. So a lot of concept art is done in like a grayscale render sketch, but that's our sketch because it shows all the value differences. Yeah. I still want to remove the shadows a little bit more. Just want to really give it a neutral tone. Because it's very hard to play with lighting when everything is already too dark or too light. Okay, so let's start to block out some very simple shadows, right? So this cloth is behind everything. So this is one of our easiest darker tones. So levels, make it darker. Don't need to go too far because it's just cloth. Right? The legs here are gonna have a drop shadow. This leg here as well. And here the leg is actually giving a shadow onto its own self. Shift F6 so that we soften this a little bit and again darken it. I'm not gonna darken up to this point. Why? Because you know it's again like this, it'll be too intense for this material. And normally a translucent material, the shadows appear slightly lighter. You can tint them if you want as well, you know, make it feel like a little bit warmer. Oh, you can barely see that. Hold on. Let me go one more pass. Okay, and then just some softer shadows. The jaw should cast a nice big shadow. The ears are big, so they should cast shadows as well. The nose will cast a shadow. The eyebrows will cast a shadow over the eyes. Lips will cast a little bit of shadow. Horns will cast a shadow. Okay, so very simple lighting blockouts, right? Oh, I forgot to soften it. Sorry. So it's not perfect. I want to stress that, right? It's just I'm just doing it quick first to let's just see how all the lighting is coming together. Okay, this is very distracting because there's too many values going on. Let me just clean that up a bit. I'm actually simplifying the forms now. I just don't like too many hot spots and light and dark spots, at least not yet. Keep it as simple as you can in the early parts. It will make the rendering much easier to understand. Okay, next is the outfit. So now the outfit has very clear two tones. So this part is obviously a lighter fabric. Let's lighten that up. And let's add a drop shadow to them. Shadow here. So the hardest part about this, which the one that requires the most study, is just really to know how much shadow to put and at what value. Kind of like rule of a thumb is like you can check your color. So let's say, let me open my color. And this is the medium tone. I call it a medium tone because you can see it sits somewhere in the middle, 40, 50, right? And the shadow drops around like 20%, right? So if this is my middle tone, because it's quite dark, if I have to drop it 20% as well, it's going to go up to black. That's fine, right? But I can't take this one and drop it here because that's going to drop more than 20%. So that's kind of like that simple rule. So why I will go back and revisit the skin because I think the drop is too far. Yeah. So but that's kind of like how you can generally measure where you're at with your value groups. So this way, even after you start rendering, you can still check it back like this, and it still have your value groups preserved, right? Because you don't really want to break this value group structure. So we'll do the same here. It's quite dark already. You're going to drop it about there. 15, 10 points in terms of the darkness. It actually works the same way with the highlights as well. So if this is your middle tone, your highlight can only go about maybe that much. So even then it's too much. Okay, so let's go back to that. 28, let's go up 10 points, 38. And that's giving me a pretty decent value to play with. When you're rendering at this early stage, keep your jumps low, like 10, 15, more than enough, right? You can increase it for that last bit of like, you want to make a section really pop, then you can do it at the end. Okay, I really want to make the hair a nice kind of like all the head stuff have nice contrast so that you can really pay attention to it in the design. So I'm just going to select all of this and crank up the contrast a little bit. So now we have a focus point, which is the red hair, and that should make it very easy for us to pay attention to the head area. Now I think I can start suggesting, if you notice, this is all still medium tone and shadow only. We haven't put highlights yet. So let's start to go into highlight zones. So highlight's gonna hit the top part here a little bit, the nose, the cheekbone, bit of the upper lip, a lot on the top ear. And I'm imagining this to be a top-down lighting scenario. And it's gonna bleed some into the arm, a little bit on the thumb, a little bit on the bone here. It's gonna hit here on the bicep, a bit on the forearm, and the forearm here. Before it starts to fade out, because I'm imagining the light to fade off, right? From here, fading down. And then a bit more light here, a bit more light here. You kind of see this gap is because of the drop shadow, so that's why there's no light there. Shift F6 to feather it a little bit. We could try just levels and see how that looks, but the uniform level might be a little bit fake, right? So I'll just add the uniform level and then go in with the highlight dodge tool and then just manually paint in areas that I want to just pop a little bit more. And my lasso selection is still on here, by the way. So this should just give me more gradient in the toning, so it doesn't look too consistently bright. Okay, I think the skin is, I like the value structure, but I think the skin is looking a bit dirty, so I'm going to tint the shadows a little bit color and see if that helps. Try the midtones. Still a little bit dirty. Let me try something else. Filter, image, adjustment, replace color. This is a great way to kind of color pick all of a selected color. Let's say you can kind of see here, I color pick all the shadow areas, and you can add on as well, you know, can get more values, and you could actually change the overall hue of that section. Yeah.
Interesting.
So let's maybe make it a little bit warmer, and then but we just brighten up a little bit because I think it's just a little bit too dark. I learned this from watching a Ryan Mannerding tutorial, you know, the Marvel head of concept art. Very, very good artist. I'm just gonna, a very soft tweak though. It's kind of hard, probably hard to notice on the projector, but it does make it feel a little bit softer. And I'm gonna do the same here in terms of adding the light spots, but this time I'll just use a magic wand, which honestly works in a similar fashion. Oops. Okay, just add a little bit of a hot spot there. Okay, so let's see where we're at so far. I I still think the skin, maybe I overdid the brightness, so let's kind of take it down a notch. Let's compare it to the previous one. You kind of see like the colors are really equally saturated at the moment. But our new version is, I will call, what more in the middle range, which I think is nice to play with. Okay, let's start to kind of tone down some of this overly consistent contrast points, because I think the skin is, number one, it lacks a bit of texture, so that's why it looks very rubbery. But it also is just, it feels like every muscle has its own highlight, which I want to avoid. Just want to give some areas a little bit more shadow where necessary. Okay, and then I can't wait to fix this face. So it's a really nice base actually. So keeping everything somewhere along the medium to dark tone. I don't want to, what I'm really scared of now is to just suddenly add like a really dark value, which I think might mess it up quite a bit. So I'm just being quite safe with my value selection. Just gonna redo the eyes. I do want them to be a little bit bigger because I think I want to test out a slightly different proportion. So because we spent all the effort just now blocking out the lighting and the color groups, I can just color pick from the entire painting, and I know like the values are gonna be fine. So this is Anthea before or after?
Before.
Yeah, so she's a little bit grumpy looking. I think what you can show is actually innocence in this early stage of her design, because then at least when she turns evil, the contrast will be higher. So I will probably amend her expression as well. So I'm experiencing a slowdown on my computer. I'm just going to merge the layers. Maybe that helps. And just get rid of these guys. So let's just soften the brow here a little bit. Having a very clean edge really helps out with the readability of the artwork. A clean edge can come from maybe because of different materials or different values, and in this case it's because of the different values, right? So whatever is underneath here, we can confidently put a quite a hard line because the values are very different, because the hair and the neck are in shadow. I can start to define the chin line a little bit better as well, because there's going to be a nice value separation between the neck and the jawline. But I'm not going to use this value, I'm going to use a value on the skin. I'm going to use a dark value just where the necklace hits the skin. Okay, starting to come along. I can start to blend some of these strokes now because I think they're starting to look a little bit, oops, a little bit dirty. So just going through the whole thing with a softer airbrush and kind of start to merge some of these values together. Use a lasso to get some more defined lighting, because I can start to be a little bit more confident now. So we spent all that work blocking it out, and now we're a bit more precise on where the light and shadow is. The expression to be a bit more positive. Skip that. The entire eyeball is under shadow, but what might happen is just a little bit of a bounce light from the bottom. So it's actually kind of reverse, interestingly, the light here. Because of how strong her eyebrows are, it's actually kind of like a canopy covering the eyeball. And because of how strong her cheekbones are, it's going to bounce light. For the actual eyeballs, I like to do a new layer just to be safe, and I start with the iris, so it does kind of look a bit creepy at first, but I like to start there because I think it allows me to get the alignment just right early on. Do I want to do straight on? Do I want to looking up? Let's give it like a slightly center but offset. Right. Sorry, I think this is the pupil. Now I'm drawing the iris. So you can kind of see like how the eyeball has depth now. The reason why you see eyeballs, right, there's always a brighter spot at the bottom. I mean, not the eyeball, the iris, and then darker spot at the top. Is because actually our eyeballs are quite interesting. Like if this is the whole eyeball, this is the iris. The eyeball is obviously a sphere, but then the iris itself is actually a concave sphere. Right, it's actually going reverse like that. So that's why when light hits the top part, it hits it normally here, but then it's going to hit the bottom here instead. So when you pair that up with all the values and everything, that's why you're going to get that little shimmer at the bottom. Like, stupidly enough, I learned this in school, but it only took me, I think I've only really understood it like in my past like 4 years working professionally, like really starting to understand. It's like, oh, I see. So that's why like my eyeballs were looking like very like stickers, you know, they didn't have the depth. So what color were her eyes again? Like green? Okay. So green, let's tint it a little bit yellow and make it a bit more fresher. So whenever you want a color to feel fresh, like don't reflect the same color, reflect the closest color to it. So if it's green, right, the closest color is either cyan or yellow. Both will give you a pretty interesting result. You can even mix like a few of them together, like mix a little bit of blue in there, it will really make the eyes pop. So one thing I like to do for ears is to make it look particularly translucent, because you know ears are very soft material, and what you get is just a very nice subsurface scattering effect inside. So I'll just grab like an orange and imagine that there's light kind of bleeding through. Because the horns are blocking this section, so these sections won't get that warm glow. It's a nice little trick to make the ears feel a little bit more alive and soft. Oh, and another reason why I think in the end I opted to make her skin quite light, it's not because I'm racist or anything, but I remember the Possessed version had very dark skin, Yeah, so I think it'll be a nicer contrast when you see like the two characters together.
When designing character design, it's always good to show lighting on top, just like that. Is it the best way?
Yes, it's because I think it's the easiest one to pull off. Because yeah, it's a good question. So like, what lighting direction should you use when you presenting artworks, right? And I'm a big fan of simple lighting, right? Like, check out this monster, right, of an artist. So,
Oh, I've seen
uh,
this work before.
oh yeah. So Zin's work is I absolutely love it because his illustrations are very complex, but the light source is really just one light,
Oh,
you know, and he puts all of his effort to make that one light work correctly, and that's why the paintings are very real and easy to go into, right? So um, I think it's one of the early amateur mistakes to try and put in too many light sources early on, right? Because what will happen is like you get confused by your own lights. Yeah, you want to have one main light source, and then if there's any secondary lights, they have a small radius of effect, right? And that's way easier to manage, right? So then you can really focus on sculpting all of the forms accurately. So that's kind of like why I just prefer to keep it simple, and you can at least gradually master the light through one light first. Yeah. So what I'm doing now is just get same theory with the what do you call it, the ears, that I'm just adding a little bit of warmth into some of the shadows parts, just to make her skin look a little bit more lively. And finally, we can actually start to introduce some light spots. Very little. If she's like sweating, then more. If she's not, then less. But I think I think it's a nice idea to suggest the fact that they live in the forest, so it's gonna be quite humid, things like that. So I'm actually using the lasso to kind of select areas that would reflect light, which is all of these bright spots here, and I'm using a speckle brush to simulate like very fine sweat droplets in the pores. It's just a very light touch, but it makes a small difference. And we're gonna go in again and then kind of manually add some more defined ones as well. So I really want to suggest that bounce light, so just because now that we have more light on our cheek, we actually need more light on our eyes as well. This is why I mentioned that bounce lights are like the real secret to realistic lighting. Okay, head is looking good. I want to see if I can adjust the contrast a little bit. Because I do feel like the contrast is still too high. So what I think is like for this one, close-up shot will be nice, but I think something softer for the full shot is better. So I'll just keep both. Let's just bump up the saturation a little bit. Again, you can actually set this to a shortcut as well, the match replace color. I mean, because it is very useful. Like let's say if you even if you do photo bashing, you want to just like change the overall color or something. Very, very effective tool. And you can kind of do some pretty nice adjustments really quickly. There we go. Okay, yeah, now she's like way more integrated. Like, you kind of see this, looks like there's a spotlight just on her head, which I don't really want to do yet, since our topic is about integration, right? Okay, so this is why, like, I don't think the cloth is the problem. You know, like it's the cloth itself is actually fine. I think it's more like the lighting everywhere else. So let's add like the last bit of drop shadow before I wrap this up. Okay, so let's do a check, right? You can see that I think the other issue that I had was like the light was coming down, but it was hitting only like the left section sometimes. So I don't know, was it like sometimes it feels like it's coming from here, sometimes it's coming here, and then you got random hot spots on the leg, right? So, but I think this one is just a little bit more consistent. You could say that maybe the contrast, or if contrast is too low, then we can kind of just do crunch the whole painting. Just if you want like more value intensity in your picture, you can just easily add it on as well. Normally, once the values groups are working together for you, it becomes very easy to color correct something. So now it's a little bit more less angled. I did want to fix this leg. I was really not happy with it. And there were some issues with the original sketch where the leg perspective didn't seem to line up. And add claw. For the sake of time, I'm not going to render it. Just paint it black first. Okay, so you've seen me done this before already, so I'm not going to talk much about it. Okay, well, it would be nice if I could maybe suggest some rim light, a bit more bounce light. The green is still, we haven't got a chance to address it yet, but this is more analogous, right? Because it's a color motif, but at least it's more analogous, meaning it's all red, oranges, and yellows. So this is also quite interesting. Green is almost like a total complementary, which could work, but maybe let's not make it so neon, so it feels more like a richer green kind of a thing. Then her eyes can pop up more so that we don't take up too much attention here. So, and then perhaps what we can do is like in this pattern structure, we could just suggest some green as well. And I'll just do this on a separate layer so that we can change our mind pretty easily later on. forgot, I wanted to show you this. So the metal bangles will be the only one that will kind of almost put like a close to white actually. If you notice, I've been kind of avoiding white in quite a bit of the parts. So I don't think that should be gold. But if, let's say, if it was gold, then this part here would just kind of pop. But it creates a new set of problems because you need to bounce back, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff, right? So swelling, gotta be careful. But now, like, there's a very clear distinction between skin, gold, because they're both quite shiny, because skin is wet most of the time, so it would reflect light. Gold, obviously, or metal is going to be very bright, and everything else kind of has a bit more of a muted tone. And if we check back our black and white to see our value structure, we still have all of our value groups present, right? Skin, tones, the lighter cloths and darker cloths, right? So it's a pretty easy design to read. Compared to what we had before, where it's a very, very dark value group. And color-wise as well, this is very saturated. This is, I would say, more, have some more balance between which one should be saturated and which one shouldn't be. Okay, so this applies to all of your other works as well. Double check the value groups for me. If you notice as well, there is a gradient from light to dark in the overall values. Right, most of the lighter values are collecting somewhere around the top here, and then it kind of fades off to a darker, so that this is the place that you're supposed to look at. Also, like the overall contrast is relatively low, and I think that's one of the easiest ways for you to start to make your paintings a little bit more realistic. If you look at student work, or you look at maybe your past work, it's a very strong habit to put blacks or very dark values in the shadows and very, very light values at the top. I myself did that before for my early works as well. Once you start to just work within the middle range, like for example, again, if you look at Zin's work, almost everything is in the middle range, unless the lighting is this kind of drastic lighting, right? But if you look at this picture, it's majority, even the white, the lights aren't exactly white. That's actually off gray. You can tell because this is white, right? And you don't really see any of this value in this painting. Even I think this one is still a few degrees away from this one. So that's why the painting feels more like a real sculpture or photo. It doesn't look like over intense. Here is a very clever use of the lightest value because it's the blade, so you really want to show off that section, so it's very close to white. And the blacks aren't exactly black as well. This is the only area that has something close to a black. Why I can say this? Because this is 100% black in the browser, right? Everything else is closer to this, which is gray. This gray is almost the same as the browser gray, so you can kind of roughly tell from there, right? And actually this is pretty far from black, right? So here's another very nice one. Very dark undercuts here, dark undercuts, and almost no light color. You can actually download this and color pick and see like what's the value, but this is almost like a very light cyan blue. It's not even white. So that's why the paintings feel very fresh and nice. A really great artist to study his works, like very nice to study because again the lighting is one light source, one key light source, so you can really understand like when does this person use dark colors, when does this person use light colors, that kind of a thing. It's much better than I mean, because like let's say I'm a big fan of Dongjun Liu as well, right? Like his works are great, but for me to study this honestly is very hard because there's so many bounce lights going on. There's so many textures going on, so many bounce lights going on. So as inspirational as it is, it's hard for me as a student or amateur to learn. I might learn the wrong things from it, which is even more dangerous. So you might just take all the surface, the cool stuff, the texture, the color mixing, but then your lighting and forms are all off. I would rather go back to like an artwork like this where it's a very clear lighting setup, right? And then understand there and then start to go from there and add on your own elements and your own taste and colors that you like. So extremely complex scene, you got like 6, 7 characters all walking around, but one single directional light going down. And it's still a great piece. Look at how many likes that is. So, right? So it really works. It's not about the amount of lights that you have, right? Okay, so after looking at that, I really hate my work now. But I need more time.